Today, we're going to be making yogurt. Let's go. Okay, so what I got here is I got a gallon of milk that is excess, which is one of the nice things about having a dairy animal. I have tons of excess milk, and what we're going to do is we're going to make it yogurt. The process is pretty simple. What we're going to do is we're going to heat this up, we're going to cool it down, we're going to add our starter culture, and then we're going to let the bacteria do the work. And come tomorrow, it's going to be nice, thick, creamy, delicious yogurt. So let's go start making it, and I'll talk you through the science and what we're actually doing and how we're doing it as we make it. So the first part of making yogurt is heating the milk up. And we can decide whether or not we heat it up a lot to 195 degrees or not as much, below 170 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what those are centigrade, but 195 Fahrenheit and or 170 Fahrenheit. And what that's going to do to us is, or for us, if we heat the milk up to that lower temperature, we're going to get a more runny, more tart style yogurt. If we heat that milk up higher, we're going to get a more nutty, eggy, thick yogurt. I like the thicker, nuttier, eggy yogurts. And why that happens is because the yogurt making process deals with proteins. Essentially, you are using the proteins contained in the milk and the lactic loving bacteria to create a protein mesh that'll hold the whey. And the higher protein milk you use, the more yogurt you'll get, the less separation of whey you'll have. And I have a Jersey cow, which is pretty high protein milk to begin with. But when we heat the milk up to that 195 degrees and we hold it for 10 minutes, we denature something called a lactoglobulin, something like that. I'm not good with pronunciations. And what denaturing that does is it allows that molecule to join with the proteins inside the milk, and it essentially creates more protein in the milk, creating that thicker milk or that thicker yogurt. So we're going to heat this up to 195 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to let it sit for 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes, so that lactoglobulin can denature and can then be combined into that protein mesh later on in the yogurt making process. Okay. So we got the milk heated up to 195 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to let it sit for 10 minutes, and then we're going to cool it down, and all of that lactoglobulin should be denatured enough to when we add the starter culture, it'll be able to be bonded in with the protein mesh and make that nice, thick, delicious yogurt. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be cooling the milk down. We had it sit at that 195 degrees for 10 minutes. And now we're going to cool it down so we can add our bacteria culture. And the bacteria culture that we get, or that I use, is from the yogurt itself. So the first time I make yogurt for the season, I'll go into the store and just get any type of yogurt that has activated bacteria culture. And not all of the store-bought yogurt is made the same. And even of the same brand, not all of it is the same. So what I try and go for is I try and go for smaller containers. I find work best. So instead of getting the big tub, get the small 8-ounce one. And I get ones that have the furthest out expiration date, so they would be the newest. I find those work the best. And then when I find a bacteria culture that I like, I just use the same culture from the yogurt that I made, and I keep that culture perpetuated and alive. And it's hit or miss. Sometimes you get good ones, sometimes you get bad ones. But if you get one that doesn't perform too well, go to the store, try a different brand. And when you find one you like, just keep reusing that same yogurt, and as long as you're making yogurt before you run out, you'll have an indefinite culture. So we're going to get this culture, or this milk, cooled down to below 120, and we're going to try and keep it above 110, and we're going to add, for 1 gallon, I add about 6 tablespoons of the cultured yogurt, and we're going to mix it up. That way that bacteria culture can go throughout the milk and it can just start doing what bacteria does, feeding on the lactose sugar and turning it into lactic acid, driving down that pH so the protein molecules can form that mesh. Let's go get my thermometer. Okay, so the milk is cooled, and I know I said small tubs are better, but I got a big tub, mainly because that's what I have in the refrigerator. And there is my 6 tablespoons. Just gonna mix it up. Get that culture nice and uniform. Get all that nice bacteria all throughout the milk so they can outcompete every other bacteria in there and make a delicious yogurt. Okay, the starter culture is nice and mixed. Now we're going to pour it into the mason jars. And I like to do this in the sink just so that way if I make a mess, it doesn't, less for me to clean. Okay, so now we got our jars inside our proofing box. We're going to keep the bacteria nice and happy at 86 degrees. And they're going to feast on all that lactose, which is going to drive down the pH, and that acidic environment is going to cause those protein molecules to bind into a nice, thick, tight mesh. And with this incubation temperature, we can go hot or we can go cold. Cold being on the 86 degrees, hot being more in that 110, 115 range. The temperature at which you let that bacterial culture incubate is going to also help determine what type of yogurt you're going to have at the end. A lower temperature is going to cause longer incubation times, but it's going to give a much tighter protein mesh, which is going to cause less whey to leak out. A higher incubation temperature will take less time, but that protein mesh isn't going to be as strong, and it's going to allow more whey to leak out of the yogurt. So take your pick. Some people think the lower temperature with the longer incubation time, it is going to take longer for that pH to get acidic enough to where no bad bacteria can thrive and they'll all die out. So some people will say, oh, you have a risk of foodborne illness. So I'm not too worried about that because I know the bacteria cultures inside the milk are safe. And that lactose-loving bacteria that I cultured in there is just going to very quickly outcompete any of the bad bugs and keep that yogurt safe, as well as make it that thick, creamy yogurt that I like. Okay, so the yogurt has been sitting in culturing for a little over 12 hours. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the yogurt and we're going to strain out any of the excess whey. All right, there's one jar. There's a second jar. There's the third jar. And here comes the fourth jar. So now all the whey is strained out of my yogurt. That's some thick, creamy yogurt, isn't it? Let's go get a spoon and taste one out. Thick, creamy yogurt. Okay, so that is how you make delicious, creamy, delicious yogurt. You take the milk, you heat it up to at least 195 degrees. You hold it there for 10 minutes to get that lactoglobulin to denature so it can join that protein mesh and actually retain the whey inside of the yogurt. You then cool it down, you add your starter culture, You put it in your jars or whatever you want to put your yogurt into. And then I let it ferment at 86 degrees Fahrenheit for a little over 12 hours. And that bacteria goes to work. It consumes that lactose sugar inside of the milk, turning it into lactic acid, drives that pH down. As that pH drops, those proteins in the lactoglobulin that we took the time to denature are going to form into a nice, solid, thick mesh, which is going to be our yogurt. I hope you like, subscribe, and stick around for more content.